Good morning. Hope everyone slept well last night. I hope you all were as inspired as I was by the events yesterday afternoon and evening. Welcome this morning, and sorry to get you up so early on a Saturday morning, but we hope it will be well worth your time. I just say a couple things about settings. I hope it was obvious why we chose Memorial Church. In some ways, too big of a space, but in other ways, entirely appropriate. I think it's also another deliberate choice in the planning committee to put this during Black History Month, and we even got an extra leap day today to get to squeeze in another day of the session. So also very, very apt. So I should mention, just when you came in, there was there it is, still running, a slideshow that's running. This was a project that two of our students did, graduate students, Amy Alimu and Robin McDowell, two our PhD students, dug into the archives at Harvard to find and various items to put together a collage, their own vision, their own take on the early days up to the present. They did this under the sponsorship of the History Design Studio, which is directed by our own Vincent Brown, and this project is co-sponsored by Design History Studio. So it will be running during the breaks. It's on our website, which I should also say launched a new website, launched live just Thursday. Thank my staff for the hard work in trying to make that happen. It was a lot to try to get a new website up in the midst of everything else, but it is up and running. And I hope you like it. So I just wanted to introduce Dean Lawrence Bobo. Quick word about Larry. Larry was the first senior faculty member to take me to lunch when I arrived here in 2000. Very generous as he's always been. At that lunch, I'm sure there's no way he would remember this conversation, but I do, that he mentioned that, with the dream team, there are the starters and there's the bench, and, he mentioned himself that he's on the bench now. Well, if he were ever on the bench, definitely became a starter, now an all-star. And if he was on the bench, I don't know where I was. I guess I was a towel boy or something. He's been a great mentor and friend for many years, even during the unfortunate years that he and Marcelina Morgan were at Stanford. They've been both very hospitable, and I've learned a ton from them both. I try to take things, bits and pieces from Skip and from Evelyn, who's here today. I cannot believe, where was Evelyn? Where's she? Oh, she's right there. Hi, Evelyn. Despite not feeling well, I'm so glad. It's wonderful to have you here. I can't imagine doing this without you here. And I've learned from Skip and from Evelyn and from Larry, various bits. I can't do them justice as a chair, but I try to emulate some of their many, many virtues. Larry's, of course, the dean of the Social Science Division, former predecessor as chair, and big supporter of this event. We wouldn't be able to do it without the social sciences support. So please welcome Dean Lawrence Bobo.
Thank you so much, Tommy, for that warm and all too generous introduction. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for getting up so early in the morning after what was a long and thrilling day yesterday. So thank you for joining us as part of this celebration and reflection on 50 years now in the life of the Department of African and African American Studies here at Harvard. Yesterday, of course, was just a marvelous, marvelous beginning, I think. My colleague and friend, our chair and leader, Professor Tommy Shelby, gave us the most remarkable and eloquent history of the department. That history emphasized the vision and courage of the students who led the fight to establish the department, the wisdom, skill, and ultimately the commitment of key faculty and administrative leaders in bringing this department to fruition, despite fraught and very uncertain beginnings. And then the rise and attainment of what our dear friend and colleague, Professor Farrah Griffin, termed lodestar status in the field. And I was especially pleased and delighted to actually hear the voices and direct reflections of those who were part of that effort more than 50 years ago of protest and demand for inclusion in the curriculum and the faculty and the student body. I think that those sessions yesterday helped bring us all to a deeper appreciation of the times in which that initial struggle took place, the complexity of the journey, and the rightness of now taking time to celebrate the successes that have come from those pivotal moments and efforts in the latter 60s. Now, the broad and insightful view of the evolution of the department and of the broader field provided by our keynote speaker, Farrah Griffin, then took our gathering, I think, to an even more robust and higher level of analysis of where we have been and what sort of ambitions and touchstones should now guide us in the future. And of course, all of these moments were interlaced with those sort of cultural celebrations and markers that have come to define life in African and African American studies, and that is the remarkable and joyous singing of the Kumba Singers and the truly outstanding performance by Yosvani Terry at the end of the day. Now, I joined the Department of African and African American Studies faculty back in 1997, and I think I remember a visit to campus maybe in 96, when Skip was still up above Bank of America there, and had just only, I think, a few months had separated the recruitment of Cornell West from that of William Julius Wilson, and I was sitting in his office and reflecting to myself on, and I may even have put the question to him this way, I mean, how much oxygen can there be left in a room that's got you, Cornell West, and Bill Wilson in it? And Skip pointed out at the time, he says, well, you know, this is going to be different from many institutions that black folks have built. This is not just about one great man. And in fact, I regale myself or take great joy in surrounding myself by incredibly bright people, many of whom I'm sure are brighter than me. Occasional moment of humility from from Brother Skip.
I was lying.
That we're all going to be part of building this astonishing and dynamic unit. And I think that really has rung true in many ways, despite this moment of humor about it, that there was just this Skip and Anthony Appia at that time had surrounded themselves with a stellar collection of colleagues. My dear friend and colleague and predecessor as chair, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, Suzanne Blier, the African art historian, Jamaica Kincaid, the brilliant writer and novelist, Cornell West, William Julius Wilson, not to mention Werner Solers, and a name we really ought not forget, distinguished economist John Kane, former chair of the econ department, who had insisted on moving part of his own FTE into Afro-Am, even though he was quickly coming up on retirement at that point. So when I come along, there were then 10 of us in the senior ranks, just 10. And I note this to contrast with today, at a point when the department, as Tommy noted yesterday, has 41 voting members. During my time as chair, I was fond of emphasizing two aspects of the department and the ecology in which it functions within the university. First, that the department really was the center of gravity for a triumvirate of units on campus that included the Du Bois Institute, now the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, and the Center for African Studies, at one point led by many of our faculty have led it, Kay Chalamet, Jacob Olupona, Carrie Elkins, who helped get its endowing gift, and now distinguished historian Emmanuel Champagne. Secondly, by the time I became chair, the department had already grown significantly under Skip and Evelyn's leadership, particularly in terms of its reach into Africa and now ultimately Afro-Latin America and the Caribbean. I think anyone who chairs this unit is at once proud but also daunted by the breadth and depth of this department. We had strength in U.S. literature, in Skip, Glenda Carpio, Werner Solers, and now rising star Jesse McCarthy. In history, Vince Brown, Evelyn Higginbotham, Walter Johnson, Elizabeth Hinton. In art and art history with Sarah Lewis. In music with Ingrid Monson, Kay Chalamet, and of course Marcelina Morgan on the cultural importance of hip hop. Our dear, dear friend and colleague, and I'm pretty sure going to be returning to us someday soon in religion in the church, Marla Frederick. And the choir said, amen. Yep, I know. In philosophy with Chairman Shelby, anthropology, sociology with Wilson, myself, David Williams, Michelle Lamont, political science, Dean Gay, Jennifer Hochschild. But the department did, as I noted, added Jacob Olupona, a leading scholar of religion in Africa, Biota and Jaifo Abiola Irele for a number of years, and Francois Lyonnais, giving us remarkable coverage of African literature, both English and Francophone. John and Jean Komaroff and George Paul Mew established established scholars in the new frontier of Africanist anthropology. John Magane and the world's greatest African language program. Emmanuel Champagne and Carrie Elkins, the Africanist historians, and now we've added young Daniel Agbiboa as well. Then, with the arrival of Alejandro de la Fuente, we began to build new strength in Afro-Latin America and the Caribbean, and are able to position ourselves to offer courses in the history, cultures, politics, and identities in the wider swath of the Americas and the Caribbean, adding to the vigor and leadership that was already provided by Dora Summer and Glenda Carpio. As you look back on the expansion and growth of this unit, I'm reminded of an event we held when Neil Rudenstein stepped down as president. We held a retirement dinner for him. And he was commenting in his remarks at the dinner on how he tried to explain to people what the success of African American studies, African and African American studies, should be understood to those who weren't academics, who weren't kind of experts in the field. And as a consumer of much Broadway and theater in New York, he recounted a conversation he had where someone asked another theater goer, what do you think of Rosemary Clooney? Should I think of this great assemblage you've brought together as being kind of like Rosemary Clooney? And the person says, well, Rosemary Clooney's fine if you like talent. He says, but I tend to think of this department as more like Ethel Merman, big, bold, unique, black, and unforgettable, right? in a category truly unto itself. And I thought it was a very apt characterization. And I knew I was entering a wholly different arena in some respects when I went to the first event kind of marking the department's occupation of the Barker Center. And there was a reception held in what's now called the Raines Library. And it was the first kind of official capacity in which I'd seen Skip interact. And a bunch of us are packed in there on a really hot early September day. And Skip comes in with Franklin Raines, who many of you may remember, I think at that point had probably just stepped down as President Clinton's director of the Office of Management and Budget. Skip said, I'm delighted to be here today as the department opens here in the Barker Center, and in particular to welcome you all to the Franklin and Wendy Raines Library, because they donated the money for this. But he says, this hadn't been easy. When I was at Yale, I tried to write to Franklin Raines, and he didn't respond to my letters. And when I was at Duke, I called Franklin Raines many times, and he never returned my calls. And he's standing there next to this man, and he goes through this litany of ways in which he'd been insulted and snubbed by Franklin Raines. And I'm just thinking, dear God, how do we get out of this? And finally, Skip says, so at one point, I'm made chair of the visiting committee. All departments at Harvard have visiting committees. And as chair, Skip had come in to do an evaluation of the department at a point when Franklin Raines was chair of the Board of Overseers for Harvard, who the visiting committees report to. And Skip came in and said, well, Chief, it looks pretty bad. You're down to one faculty member and one undergraduate major, and that's just not a vibrant unit. But you know what? This is Harvard. And Harvard has the capacity to do something remarkable. And in that moment, I am told in that story, Skip sketched a vision of what Harvard was in a place to do if it really wanted to make a difference in this field. And Franklin Raines said, thank you, Professor Gates. Why don't you go out in the anteroom and wait while we discuss what we're going to do here. And now how much of this is apocryphal and how much of this he'll actually put in his memoirs, I don't know. We'll see. And Skip said after about an hour, Raines came back out and said, listen, thank you so much for this brilliant, enormously clarifying report. And the only question the rest of us have really is, when are you coming here to do it? And the rest, in many respects, is history. In the larger scheme of things, the point I want to make this morning is that the department reflects and embodies a remarkable vision for teaching and research at the highest levels of scholarship and across the full reach of the experience of those of African descent on the continent, in the U.S., and across the Americas and the Caribbean. It's exciting to be in a position to feel the breadth of the curriculum that we are able to here. It's exciting to have a faculty that produce cutting-edge scholarship on topics such as mass incarceration here in the U.S. and the evolution of legal regimes in Africa, that teach us the continuities and unique features in religious expression in Brazil or Cuba, the U.S., Ghana, and Nigeria. I could go on and on in this manner. I am reminded of several very special types of experiences that I think are unique to this department. We have a growing number of undergraduate enrollments. Kind of the trend has been steadily marching upward, I think, overall. And one of those great attractions is AFAM 10, with a model initially established by Brother Cornell West and the excitement of the Dream Team era, which he's now renewed. Then Skip and Evelyn putting forward this remarkable course. Skip and I doing it for a while, organized around great debates. And the students get an insight into something about the nature of race and racism, the troubling character of white supremacy as an ideological form and a cultural imprint that has distorted so much of our lives in this world. But we've also had very special courses on occasion, as when William Julius Wilson taught his remarkable course on The Wire. And David Simon, the producer and writer of The Wire, and a number of the actors coming out for that, achieving, really kind of worldwide news coverage of this remarkable kind of pedagogical moment to wed serious sociological research on the modern urban African-American experience within the class instruction and kind of major cultural production in this remarkable television series. And I think more recently of Jamaica Kincaid and Marcy Morgan offering a course on Black love and the difference it makes. Having said those wonderful things, the department every now and again faces challenges. We survived a tough era, as you all know. Sometimes people retire. Sometimes they are stolen away, though we expect them back. And at the end of the day, I think we are all animated by a sense of great purpose, that there really is a long and daunting struggle to unmake white supremacy and racism as features of our culture and ideas and worldviews. that we have a commitment to elevating the place of those of African descent, to a deep recognition of the full humanity and the profound contributions to the advance of civilization. And I think it is only fitting then that we take much of today to reflect on the experience of alums who've come through this department and its courses, to examine the questions surrounding our development and I think success of the PhD program and the young scholars that we have now produced who are out in the world becoming leading figures in their own right, and to consider afresh and anew our connection to communities and to questions of activism in the future. I was deeply honored to spend a period of 5 years as chair of this department, as a member of the university administration now these days. I know the enormous pride and the depth of commitment to the ongoing success of this department that is felt in University Hall and Massachusetts Hall. And so I'm delighted to be a part of welcoming you all here this morning. And at this juncture, I'm going to turn it over to my distinguished young colleague and kind of keen political theorist and thinker, Brandon Terry, for our morning's first session. Brandon.